Welcome to Diabetes Day by Day, the American Diabetes Association's official podcast. I'm Dr. Neil Skolnik, professor of family and community medicine in the Sidney Kimmel Medical College of Thomas Jefferson University, and joining me today is my co-host.
I'm Dr. Sarah Wettergreen. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Clinical Pharmacy at the University of Colorado Skaggs School of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences. And in this role, I practice as an ambulatory care clinical pharmacist at the UC Health Lone Tree Primary Care Clinic.
Welcome to our inaugural issue. We want this podcast to be a critically important resource for people with diabetes. And to do so, we're going to cover large issues, living your best life with diabetes. We're going to cover details of issues over time, talking with dietitians and diabetes educators and everyone you can think of, going over both old information and new information to give you the skills that you want and need over time. Right, Sarah?
That's exactly right, Neil. And we know there are so many big and small issues people with diabetes face day to day. We'll start by talking about some large issues to help patients live their best life with diabetes, such as nutrition and exercise tips and information about different medicines. But today we're going to cover a large issue, and that is dealing with the diagnosis of diabetes. So joining us today to share his story is Julian Brittano, who is a man of many talents. He is a fantastic screen actor who has played opposite Oprah Winfrey on the TV series Greenleaf, is a music recording artist and producer, and an entrepreneur. Julian, we're so honored to have you here today.
Thank you, Sarah, Dr. Sarah and Neil. I appreciate you both. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and share my experiences with you.
Absolutely. Thanks again for being here. So to get us started, can you tell us a little bit about your personal background and your career?
I come from New Jersey, originally born and raised. I did a few years in college at University of Maryland. But most of my life, I've been in nightlife. Like I've worked in nightlife. I worked in bars, restaurants, clubs, all type of things like that since I was a teenager to make extra money, And it definitely played a major role in lifestyle, especially dealing with type 2 diabetes.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I can even imagine working in a nightlife type scene, maybe your sleep patterns are off, and even that can be enough to add some extra stress and put that stress onto your body and have some of those physical effects. So that makes a lot of sense.
The lack of sleep, the food, eating all times of night, all different types of food, and then you're back up. So, like you said, you're only getting 2 hours of sleeping, especially work, New York City nightlife, that's 4 or 5 a.m. So that's a different ball game to most places. Yeah, it definitely plays a role,
Yeah, it definitely sounds like you have a good self-awareness of your overall health. So can you share with us how you first found out you had diabetes?
Sure. I was actually diagnosed back in 2008 with onset for type 2. I went in, I wasn't feeling that great. I actually went to take my newborn son to the hospital because he had an ear infection. I just wanted to check it out and everything, and I didn't want to end up having to stay. But it was the first wake up call. I went, followed up with my doctor, went on a regimen, with some medications, metformin and whatnot. And I did some things because I was a lot bigger then. I was 320 pounds at that point. I made some adjustments, definitely I made adjustments.
Julian, that's remarkable. That's interesting. So you went in, you were feeling generally not great. Is that right?
Correct.
And then this was a surprise diagnosis to you. Is that correct?
Yeah, because I hadn't had any prior or previous diabetes situations.
Obviously, you were a guy who's in shape. You'd been playing football. It must have been tough to hear that you had diabetes. What went through your mind? when the doctor told you that?
I gotta make some changes. At that time I was 30. I was 30 years old at that point.
Yeah, so 320 pounds. You have a new family. You have your infant son, and you're told you have diabetes. And it's a real tribute to you that your thoughts at that time was, I got to make changes. It sounds like one of the things you did was, wow, you own this. You took responsibility. How did you make those changes? Those changes in lifestyle are hard to do.
No, they are. They're daily task. I still deal with things now. I had a situation occur last year that even made me had to think even more so and focus and put true measures in place. But this thing is very real. Like I thought I was. I mean, I knew I wasn't all the way where I needed to be, but I didn't think that my A1Cs was as high as they were last year. At that time in 2008, I had dropped some weight. I got down about 280 pounds, 285 pounds, so I made some adjustment. I was feeling better and my numbers were looking good. So I took myself off my metformin
Sure.
and I thought it was fine.
So how did you, when you say you dropped about 40 pounds, how did you do it? Was it diet, exercise?
It was adding a little more exercise, cutting out certain things like cutting out the sodas, cutting out the sodas. That's a huge contributor to your sugar. You're drinking all your sugar, your carbs.
You are so right. That is so important for our audience to hear. I had a patient recently who her A1C was very high. I started an additional medicine. She came back, got the labs done a few months later before I saw her. Her A1C went down by a full 2 points. I thought I was so smart. I said, this is great. The medicine's really working. She said, I never took it. I said, well, how'd your A1C drop? She said she cut out the big gulp sodas. She used to drink 2 of them a day, and that was the change that she made. So I think for our listeners, your point is so important.
Well, also too for the listeners to understand that this is a lifelong journey and process. All right, I still was eating McDonald's and this and that at the time, whatever the case may be. But instead of getting, the supersize and the 2, double cheeseburgers, or whatever the case is, if you get your chicken, if that's what you want to eat, you don't have to eat 8 pieces of chicken. Get 2, or just you don't have to eat a whole pizza pie. Have a slice, that's what it is we overindulge. Yeah. But you just take your time and don't you not eat all the portions.
And it strikes me, you had mentioned your son earlier, that when we can watch ourselves and develop healthy habits for ourselves, probably one of the biggest effects, we're good for our own health, but our kids watch what we do. They don't listen to what we tell them to do. They watch what we do. And what an example you are, I am sure, for your family.
Thank you. I'm working on it. I work on it, and my family get to see what I do. They see me do it. They see me doing it. Like even with last year's situation with my A1Cs being almost a 14, and having my sepsis blood, infected blood. I had an injury to my toe. I had to get an amputation. My big right toe. You know what I mean? It's all within a few days. Like I'm like, oh, what? Yeah. So, but they saw me hobble, take my steps after being off my feet for 6 weeks, and getting my stitches out and diving right into my own rehabilitation.
Right.
I try to lead by example with everything I do. Going plant-based for 5 months. Yeah. Cold turkey, just because I had to get out of the crisis. Yeah. My A1C was high, I had the sepsis blood, which I was still fighting an infection at that point, and I had to recover with the amputation. So a lot happened. So I had to make drastic changes. And I hope for the audience that they don't have to wait to these different, points and places in their lives, but get out there, make sure you stay on top of your blood work, stay on top of it. You know how you're feeling. Nobody else knows how he's feeling, what's going on, if you got tingling, if you got this, and go get it checked out. And that's a reminder for me daily. So I just hope that adds some value there. Like,
I think that's so important. And Sarah, I know that you work with a lot of patients on kind of working on both their medicines and daily habits as a pharmacist. Your thoughts, Sarah?
Yeah, so I feel like that situation you had last year, Julian, can be really motivating and keeping you consistent with those habits of getting the dietary changes done, staying active, staying on top of the blood work, like you're saying. And like you said, this is a lifelong challenge that you're going to be facing. You can have these bursts where you're more motivated for a period of time, but certainly someone like you has a busy set schedule like many of our listeners do. So how do you maintain these daily habits of taking care of yourself and making these changes when you are someone with this busy schedule?
it's a good question. So at the end of the day, Sarah, what I do is I approach it. You're gonna have your challenges. So take it a piece at a time is what I gotta say to you all. Like, don't try to think you're gonna get all the results at one time. That's not gonna happen. You still got things you gotta do to maintain it daily. So take your time, people, but just take a bite.
I love that, Julian. I completely love that. I think it can be so overwhelming when you have that new diagnosis of diabetes. You're given this buffet of things you need to do, so to speak. You got to change your diet, exercise differently, take medications consistently, figure out your healthcare system, take care of yourself, all these things that you're now responsible for taking care of in addition to your daily life. So I love that idea of starting with those bite-sized chunks, thinking of these challenges each day as just one more test that you can push through in bite-sized chunks, I think is a great outlook.
Let me ask you one question, Julian, uh, before we bring our podcast to a close. And none of us do it alone. None of us go it alone.
Right.
And in terms of strength and staying on it, um, does your wife uh, enter into that picture of helping you figure out where does she fit into this?
It's so interesting because she actually got diagnosed with type 1 or 1.5, they're calling it now, 6 years ago. You know what I'm saying, at 32 years old, she got diagnosed with type 1, or whatever. And so daily, we are there to support one another.
It's a partnership. We all need a partner in our journey, and
Yeah.
it is helpful. Let me ask you, Julian, if there's one piece of advice that you want to leave our listeners with, what would that be?
Don't neglect. Like I said earlier, do not neglect what you feel within your body. If something is off, if your energy is different, if utilizing the restroom more often than you normally are, or any little thing that's different for you, not to be a hypochondriac about things, but just stay on top of what's happening with yourself. Because once you know, then there are people out here that have studied, that are experts in their fields, that they can help you and keep a positive mindset. And don't let anything or none of these diagnoses, send you down a dark hole where you can't pull yourself out of, because I'm a walking and living example of someone that pulled myself up by my bootstraps from 14, almost a 14 A1C down to a 7 in 2 months.
That's incredible, Julian. Thank you so much for sharing your personal experience and even your challenges in diabetes self-management. I know so many of our listeners are patients with diabetes who have faced their own struggles, and I think it's okay to see that sometimes things will be better controlled and sometimes you will have to go into that dark place to get yourself to recover. But hopefully I feel inspired by your message. So hopefully other feels inspired as well to try to continue to stay on top of things, to not have to get into that place where they have to be so reactive. And just like you said, want to reemphasize the importance of working with your healthcare team. They're there to support you and they have access to different resources if you do have challenges with affordability.
Julian, this really has been inspiring, and I think this is going to be wonderful for our listeners. Julian Brittano, actor, musician, entrepreneur, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Sarah, and everybody else over at ADA. Shout out to the whole ADA family.
That is right. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on Diabetes Day by Day. Tune in next month for another episode of Diabetes Day by Day, where we're going to discuss It Takes a Village, working with your diabetes team, where we'll talk with dietitians, certified diabetes educators, nurses, doctors, pharmacists, and families to discuss the benefits of a team approach to diabetes care. Till next time, I'm Dr. Neil Skolnik.
And I'm Sarah Wettergreen.
And we look forward to talking with you again next month.